And I have the pleasure to welcome to the Council on Foreign Relations, because Richard Hawes is not here, James Clapper, who's the Director of National Intelligence. He's the fourth person to hold that job. He oversees 16 intelligence agencies, including CIA, NSA, FBI, and others. I think somebody called it a federal Uber agency of all things secret, appointed by President Obama in June of 2010, retired Air Force General, former Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, 32 years in uniform. We have many things we want to talk about, and I think you know this is on the record. I'll mention a couple of things that they always ask me to say. Wait for the microphone and speak directly into it. I'll have a 30-minute conversation, and then we'll speak directly into the microphone. Limit yourself to one question. Be precise. We're really interested more in your questions than your statements, as you know. And we want to get as many people in as we possibly can. But it's a pleasure to have him here. It's an important job. This is a difficult time. As he has said, he sees more things than any time, challenging issues facing the country than at any time. So join me in welcoming James Clapper. I want to begin with Russia and the U.S. relationship with Russia. The Russian UN ambassador said in the last week that relations are as bad as he's seen them in the last 40 years. Characterize the U.S.-Russian relationship.
Well, it's not, it's certainly not at its, peak by any stretch. We've had a lot of difficult issues, notably in, Syria, Ukraine, just to name two. So it's a stressed time for the relationship. I don't know that it's worse than at times I can recall. I'm a Cold War warrior and lived through all that. It's worse than that. There's some pretty bad times then when we weren't getting along at all. They're still communicating. Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov are in a constant dialogue, so that's a good thing. But I think this will be clearly a challenge for the next administration, is the management of that relationship.
So what do you think is driving Putin?
I think he's somewhat of a throwback, not so much to the heyday of the communist era, the Soviet Union, rather throwback to the Tsar era. And I think he has this vision of a great Russia as a great power. It's extremely important to him that Russia be treated and respected as a global power on a par with the United States. And I think that has a lot to do with impelling his behavior.
Let me go right to what is on the newspapers and everybody else's mind today. It is hacking and a threat to, or perhaps a motivation to impact the U.S. elections. What can you tell us about that?
I'm probably not going to go much beyond the statement that Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson and I issued about it. Many people seem to want me to reparse the words, which were already very parsed and agonized over. So I think the statement will stand for itself. I will say that there's a history here for the Soviet Union, Russia, now interfering in elections, both theirs and other people's. And there's a history of this, of where they've attempted to influence the outcome of our elections before.
And it's said that he thinks we tried to interfere in his elections.
Well, people live in glass houses, I guess, applies here.
Shouldn't throw rocks?
Right. That's the rest of the sentence.
Yes. But will it have an impact? Do you think he'll be successful? Has he created suspicion? Have these disclosures raised questions that
Well,
somehow will cause people to question the
that's
American democratic process? And can they affect it at the voting machines and all of that?
I don't believe so, but that's not an issue for the national intelligence apparatus to decide. I think a strength for us in this case is the highly decentralized nature of our voting apparatus, which is run by states and local jurisdictions, and make it very hard, I think, to affect the outcome. I don't know cases where voting machines are tied to the internet, and of course that's the common denominator of our security weaknesses that we have. Your reference to hacking is germane.
Okay, but I mean, so do you believe that they wouldn't be doing this if it did not go to the top? That those things you can trace to Russia would not be happening if, in fact, had not been, this is not freelanced by FSB or anybody else?
I believe our statement said that we believe the direction for this was coming from the highest levels of the Russian government.
Yeah, I was hoping you would enlarge on that.
I'm not going to embellish that statement anymore.
Why, when we talk about a proportionate response, the vice president said, Putin will know, but I hope others will not know.
Well, I think he said something along the lines of, if and when we do something, it'll be at a time and place of our choosing. And it may not be necessarily a symmetrical response. It may be asymmetrical.
But there is also a sense that they're not paying a price for this.
Well, maybe not yet.
Maybe after the election.
Well, again, I'm not going to preempt. I mean, it's a policy issue about what we do, if anything, and when we do it.
Yeah, but you know
That's
things.
not an intelligence issue to decide.
But you know things. Don't you?
Well, in 84 days, I'll have my brain washed.
But I mean, it is said that the president might genuinely worry about an escalation of this kind of thing, with all the dangers there is, both in terms of hacking, but also in terms of cyber warfare.
Are you speaking
I'm talking about hacking now first.
about the election?
No, I'm speaking about, in fact, if we respond, they respond,
Well,
we respond.
exactly.
That gets out of control.
That's exactly the issue. And I can recall instances where we got a big head of steam up about wanting to retaliate in a symmetrical manner. And you have to consider things like, are we counterattacking through another nation state's infrastructure, which poses all kinds of legal issues. Lawyers get very agitated about that. And then, of course, you need to think about the potential counter retaliation to the retaliation you took, and how well you think, and this applies to any nation state, how well you think we can withstand a counter retaliation. And those get to be very complicated calculations.
And the risk is?
Sometimes it's better perhaps to consider other options other than the symmetrical one.
And the risk is?
Well, the risk is given the tremendous dependence of this nation on the cyber domain to do everything, whether it's personal, institutional, we have to think twice, I think, and be very cautious about retaliating in a cyber context, because the presumption that there's going to be an equally exquisite and precise calculus may not be a valid one to make.
But this is a new world we're living in with respect to the internet.
Precisely.
I mean, I love the terms they use, fancy bear and cozy bear. and Guccifer.
Okay.
Does all of this show something about the vulnerability of our systems?
It does. You know, when the internet was first as an experiment, and then as it mushroomed, security was never an integral part of what the internet was designed for. I mean, it just wasn't a consideration.
No, in fact, it was the opposite.
And so we're kind of paying the price for that now.
So what are our options then?
Well, I think we're always going to be in unless in the absence of some technological breakthrough, I think we're always going to be in somewhat of a catch-up mode. There are some fundamental cyber hygiene things that surprisingly individuals and institutions don't attend to. Increasingly, though, I think there's an awareness, particularly in the commercial sector, and of course, the attention getter there is always how does this affect my bottom line, and that is what I think is motivating increasingly the private sector and private sector companies to pay more attention to cybersecurity. But it's always an action and reaction. And as long as we have this dependency on the internet, we're always going to have this fundamental challenge of how to promote security in the cyber domain.
It's a fact that we've gotten much better at attribution, haven't we? We pretty much know where it comes from these days.
Well, that certainly helps. I think that does provide perhaps some degree of deterrence, but you know, we don't have enough body of law yet. We haven't, in my opinion, this is not company policy, it's just me speaking, but we have not been able to generate either the substance or the psychology of deterrence in the cyber realm. And that's going to continue to be an issue for us. It's easier, perhaps, with nation states, but, and of course, nation states have other vulnerabilities besides their cyber security weaknesses. It's non-nation state entities, or the nations that have been in the past considered to have a lesser capability, and I'm thinking of the likes of Iran and North Korea.
Yeah.
Where we've had this disparity or contrast between the capability of the most sophisticated cyber actors, nation-state cyber actors, which are clearly Russia and China, but have, to this point, perhaps more benign intent, and then you have other countries who have a more nefarious intent, and then even more nefarious are non-nation state actors. So how to create both the substance and the psychology of deterrence against all those potential actors, I don't think we figured that out yet.
Was the internet attacked a non-state actor?
Well, the investigation's still going on. There's a lot of data to be gathered here. That appears to be preliminarily the case.
A non-state actor?
Yes, but I wouldn't want to be conclusively definitive about that yet. That's
as to who it was?
Early call, yeah.
But you know.
Well, specifically whether a nation state may have been behind that or not.
Okay. Why, you know, we looked at the North Koreans and Sony and identified them. With the Iranians later, there were some indictments. We haven't said anything about the Chinese, and it took us like 3 or 4 months to respond and identify the Russians. I mean, what's the calculus behind all that?
Well, in the most recent case, the reason for the delay was, at least for my part, was driven by confidence, greater certitude about attribution.
Right.
And in our business, it's always better to have multiple sources when you're going to dime out a nation state publicly. And so we want to be kind of careful about that. The other thing about all this business of attribution is that oftentimes the means by which we do that is fragile and perishable. And so if we are too transparent about it, everybody like to know, I want the details, well, then we risk losing those perishable, fragile sources that give us the insight in the first place.
Let me turn to North Korea. Can you tell us what's the status of their ability to put a nuclear warhead on a missile that can reach the west coast of the United States?
Well, we've actually assessed that capability. We, in a situation like this, always have to worst case. But frankly, in the case of their intercontinental ballistic missile, the KN-08 specifically, neither they nor we know whether that missile will actually work since it's never been tested. But nevertheless, we ascribed to them the capability to launch a missile that would have a weapon on it that potentially could reach parts of the United States, certainly including Alaska and Hawaii.
What's the time frame?
Time frame for what?
For them being able to do that.
Well, we've assessed this for years.
They can do it.
That they could do it. I mean, we can't. Again,
that's the worst case scenario.
I will say again,
right.
Neither they nor we know whether their missile systems will work, but we have to make the worst case assumption here.
Okay. What if it works? What are our options? Sanctions, sabotage, or
Well,
just
they actually
trust?
launch the missile.
No, we know they have that capability. We're assured. So it's not just a worst case scenario, but it's a scenario that's possible and likely.
Mm-hmm.
What are our options? What's our strategy?
Well, that's a policy call.
I know.
I don't do policy.
Yeah, I know. But you have opinions.
I just down the engine room shoveling
Yeah,
coal. People on the bridge.
So when
outside
the president says, what do you think we should do? What's your strategy? You say, that's opinions. I don't have opinions.
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of options.
Right.
Obviously, military is one of them.
Right.
Sanctions, although we're kind of running out of gas on sanctions since we've imposed most of them that we can.
Right.
The key player with respect to sanctions is, of course, China. And so if a military option were to be exercised, obviously we would play very heavily in that process, but that's not a decision, fortunately, that the intelligence community makes.
When you look at China and their game in the South China Sea, this is not a positive question, this is an analysis. What are they up to? Is this some kind of Monroe Doctrine by China?
The Chinese feel very strongly about their rectitude, about their exorbitant claims in the South China Sea, that all the maritime area contained within the so-called nine-dash line. The tribunal decision aside, notwithstanding, they are very committed to their claims in the South China Sea. I was there recently, and it certainly was reaffirmed to me by the Chinese interlocutors that I engaged with.
When you go there, you see their head of intelligence, or who do you see?
Well, the primary figure that I engage with is Secretary Meng, who is the Politburo member, who is the overseer for their intelligence and security organizations.
One thing the CIA does clearly, and therefore you, is make analysis of leadership in respective countries and their ambitions and their profiles. Lots of reports in newspapers about the continued authoritative kind of moves by Xi Jinping, and that he may even want to do another term. What can you tell us about him?
Well,
What interests you about him?
yeah, that's always a hardy perennial for intelligence, is plans and intentions of leaders. And we do the best we can, oftentimes have to do it inferentially by behavior that they exhibit, because you know, there's the old saw in intelligence about mysteries and secrets.
Yes.
And secrets are knowable facts, and mysteries are. And I think, at risk of sounding a bit defensive, I think too often we're held to the same exacting standards for divining both. And we're not clairvoyant. Nevertheless, I would offer that President Xi is, you know, the thing that impels leadership in China is, first and foremost, I believe, is domestic stability.
Right.
And so...
Hence there's paranoia.
Well, yes, I think there's a certain amount of, there is, as we would call it, paranoia about being contained, very sensitive about the appearance of the U.S. containing China. And so I think a manifestation of that behavior is the way they've approached their claims in the South China Sea. But the biggest thing, again, internally is domestic stability. And so he's embarked on a reform program to try to eliminate corruption, and I think is bent on keeping the control by the party apparatus. As well, which I find both disturbing and also impressive, is an extensive military modernization program that the Chinese have mounted across many fronts.
And including a huge naval investment to extend their power around the world.
Yes, and also in the space arena.
Right.
They have, in recognition of our dependence on space for lots of purposes, they've accounted for that as a part of their modernization.
Characterize the Middle East.
A mess. Makes your head hurt, it really does. It's extremely complex situation there, and the complexity is probably most focused right now in Syria, of the many competing interests there, and
including the Russians.
Including the Russians. I think Tom Friedman, many of you know, writes for the New York Times. About 3-4 years ago, I thought he had a great line on one of the talk shows on Sunday, where Mideast is too important to ignore and too expensive to fix. And I think it was a one-liner bumper sticker, that kind of...
Yeah, but you, in fact, have said we can't fix the Middle East.
No, we can't.
What can we do?
Well, we can help others, but in the end, I think fixing the Mideast, whatever that means, is not something the United States can do unilaterally.
But we're participating in Iraq now in the battle to retake Mosul,
Right.
with both air support and special forces on the ground.
Right.
How long do you think that's going to take? And what should we know about it?
Probably a long time. I'll tell you, the greater concern I would have is what happens after Mosul is declared recaptured.
And what is your concern?
Well, what will happen in terms of holding it, and more importantly, what about governance in Mosul, and then recovery,
right,
depending on how much destruction occurs in a highly urbanized situation. And if that vacuum isn't filled rapidly with governance, provision of municipal services, et cetera, that will just, provide the fertile ground for ISIL or some other extremist group to come back.
I mean, everybody in today's papers talk about Turkey wanting to be in. I mean, Turkey saying, please, we want to come fight and be part of them. Is that sort of like you want to be in on the takeoff so you can be there on the landing?
the Turks have, yes, they are concerned about ISIL, but the primary concern they have, of course, is a united Kurdish nation, if I could use the term with air quotes, across their southern border. So they're most concerned about the Kurds. That's their primary motivation, and of course, the extent that they can prosecute a campaign against ISIL. That's
The Iraqi prime minister said he assumed this is going faster than he expected. And obviously, you've got all the things after Mosul falls. You said Mosul falls, and you have said you clearly need some kind of governing there.
Right.
This is also a concern in Syria as well, in terms of what happens there. And if in fact ISIL is defeated in Raqqa, if that happens and they take the battle somewhere else, and you end up with a civil war there, just a civil war.
Well, we already have one in Syria.
No, that's what I mean. And end up with that's the primary fight there between the Assad government and rebels.
Well, it's actually, I think, a lot more complex than that because there's so many shades of opposition groups
Right.
In Syria. And of course, yeah, the added complexity of the Russians who very much want to keep their beachhead, toehold, whatever figure you want to use, in the Mideast, and by propping up what has been a staunch ally of theirs. And again, that just adds to the complexity there.
It's likely Assad will be in power when President Obama leaves.
Well, that's a fair guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we do? What's our strategy?
Not my department. I don't have to do that.
What worries you the most? What worries you the most?
Well, in general, or about
Syria and about where it's going, and whether Mosul will make more likely an attack on Raqqa, whether
well, I think
whether al-Nusra is what role they play.
What concerns me, I guess, is lots of things concern me.
No.
But,
in fact, you said the thing that you worry about most is what you don't know.
What you don't know, right? Exactly. Yeah, you remember it. That's really good. No, that is a concern. I think what we have to be mindful of as the nation-state attributes, such as they are, of the caliphate asserted by ISIL, is being defeated,
Right.
As a so-called or nation-state-like entity. But I think the history of ISIL, going back to its Al-Qaeda in Iraq roots, is one of resilience and flexibility. So the situation, what worries me about all this is we've gotten focused, understandably, on recapturing territory or cities, and in this case Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria.
Right.
So when that happens, then what then does ISIL, what form does it take after that? Because it is probably not going to go away, and it'll morph into something else, or other similar extremist groups will be spawned, and I believe we're going to be in the business of suppressing these extremist movements for a long time to come.
So whatever happens in Raqqa, ISIS will still be with us in some form or under some name, in the same way they morphed out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Right.
When you look back in terms of the intelligence world that you have inhabited, what mistakes have we made? For example, with the focus on terrorism and all that we had to do by nature, did we take our eye off what Russia was doing?
That's a very good question, and I have been concerned about just as for the program I manage, the National Intelligence Program, which is what funds the agencies and the other components of the intelligence community, is the very large proportion of that is devoted to counterterrorism. and while at the same time keeping our eye on all the other
Hotspot.
challenges that we have, and you know, major nation state like Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. While we're so focused, so consumed, and so preoccupied with counterterrorism, so I do worry about that. Now, how we allocate resources and proportion to each one of those targets is not a unilateral intelligence community decision. We have lots of help from the policymakers and from the Congress as well that determine those priorities. But just sitting in my position, I worry about that.
You have experience in this too. Should the same person command both NSA and cybersecurity?
Well, I think we've reached the point where it is time to separate the two. I was a part of the decision-making in the Pentagon when I was the Undersecretary for Intelligence to start Cybercom both as a sub-unified command and under a dual-hat arrangement. That was never intended to be permanent in any event. Mm-hmm. And that's been, you know, 6 years. And I do think that we've reached the point where each of these responsibilities, as you know, Cybercom commander and director of NSA, are large enough and of sufficient magnitude that they should be separate. I've done a couple agencies myself. As director of DIA and then again as director of NGA for almost 9 years, and running any of these agencies is an all-consuming 7x24 proposition. So I, for lots of reasons, think they should be separate.
If you were going to leave a note, I'm going to have two last questions before I turn it over. If you were going to leave a note on the next president's desk, as is sort of a tradition with presidents, what would your note to the next president say?
I would hope that the next president, whoever it is, would continue in the tradition of the current president in allowing and encouraging truth to power. I think that is a fundamental writ of intelligence, that it be presented to the president in an unpoliticized, unvarnished manner. And I would hope the next president would continue in that tradition.
To want that and to need that.
And to encourage it and to defend it.
Last question. You know, you said that what you worry about is what you don't know. And I mean this seriously. What might you not know?
Well, lots.
What is it that might be out there that you don't know about, but you have some sense of, intuition backed by experience and some evidence that scares the hell out of you?
Well, when you have some insight into, say, a terrorist plot, even though you may not know a lot of the details, but you have some insight. You may not know timing, may not know all the individuals who are involved, may not know exactly what the nature of a plot may be. But if you have something to start with, you can build on that. You can bring to bear more resources, more collection. So the things you worry about where you have no insight whatsoever into a potential bad event. And of course you can conjure up all sorts of nefarious scenarios that could happen that you may not know about.
Thank you very much. Let me begin with questions. Start right here.
Thank you. Earl Carr representing Momentum Advisors. Thank you very much.
Remember, we said short, sweet, and right to the point.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for your service and your presentation. My question is regarding to the Philippines. You have a new president who has talked about ending military relations with the United States, and he has recently taken a trip to China in which he has very much welcomed Chinese investment. What is your assessment of the current situation?
Well, President Duterte has a point of view, I think conditioned quite a bit by his own life and his apparent resentment of the United States and its relationship with the Philippines. So he's reached out to the Chinese, and you know, it's clearly some of the things he's been saying and doing are bothersome for us. I recently chaired a conference of Asian intelligence services, and the idea was to promote more sharing on ISIL, and had occasion to have a private meeting with Philippine seniors who are themselves concerned about the impacts on our relationship. So, you know, we'll just have to see how this all plays out. I think he is definitely playing to a domestic audience, and I think he reflects his background as a city mayor.
And you assume he's tilting to China?
Well, that's the appearance.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Thank you. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. Director Clapper, I want to follow up on Charlie Rose's top of the question, which was about the interview with Vitaly Churkin, which we participated in with 2 other news organizations. He also made allegations about the attack against the humanitarian convoy in mid-September, the alleged U.S. attack on Syrian forces, which some U.S. officials have called a mistake, and then suggested that the U.S. and Russia join side by side to protect Costello Road. I know that's a policy question. You may not be able to speak with that, but what's the state of intelligence on the Aleppo issue and trying to get humanitarian aid in? Thank you.
Well, we watch very closely developments in Aleppo, which is a humanitarian disaster. It's terrible what's happened there, and our efforts to secure a meaningful cessation of hostilities have not been very successful, regrettably. The aforementioned American attack that you mentioned was a mistake. There's no question about that. What happened in war, it's regrettable that every munition expended isn't done so with exquisite precision. And sometimes these tragic accidents happen. So we're watching this as carefully as we can. It's a very, very high interest to our policymaker community, and we would certainly like to find a way to relieve the tremendous humanitarian tragedy that exists in Aleppo.
But the world is saying, why can't we do something? It really is, and it's saying history is going to badly judge everybody who touched Syria. What?
Not an intelligence question.
At the back, yes. Right there, yes.
Spencer Ackerman with The Guardian, thanks. What's your assessment of how Russia will react if the U.S. imposes a no-fly zone or a safe zone in parts of Syria?
Well, I don't know. Again, I'm not a mind reader, but I do take seriously the very sophisticated air defense system and the air defense coverage that the Russians have. And I think I wouldn't put it past them to shoot down an American aircraft if they felt that was threatening to their forces on the ground. So I take stock in the nature of the weaponry that they deploy and why they did that. The system they have there is a very advanced air defense system. It's very capable, and I don't think they do it and deploy it unless they had some intent to use it.
All right, here in the, yes. I'm trying to move around the room for everybody. So
Sarah
the
Lewis,
people
Human
back.
Rights Watch. Can you describe what U.S. targeting assistance for Saudi Arabia and Yemen has looked like specifically? What exactly, precisely, does targeting assistance look like? And also, in terms of reports that CIA military assistance to Syrian armed groups has reached some of the most extreme armed groups, including ISIS, do you consider that an intelligence failure?
Answer to your last question is no. What's the targeting situation look like? If we are engaged with anyone, you know, humanitarian considerations and abiding by the principles of the law of armed conflict are always foremost, and what we do and the advice that we render. But you know, you're dealing with nation states, sovereign nation states, and you know they'll take actions that they deem best and or what is in their interest.
Yes, here.
Campini, La Repubblica. Regarding the response to cyber attacks from Russia, but also the use of the internet and social media to prevent terrorist attacks, are you satisfied with the current level of cooperation between the US and European countries? Or what kind of progress would you like to see in that cooperation?
Well, to me, there's a little bit of schizophrenia maybe in Europe. You have European Union, which is very much a proponent for openness and transparency and freedom of movement of people and goods. And that is overlaid against, you know, the people I deal with in the intelligence and security services who are very, very concerned about, well, the migrant crisis and the challenges that European countries have with ISIL. So we've done what we can to promote sharing and integration. The White House asked me to lead a conference, which we did last April in Germany, and convened several nations in Europe to do just that, which was to promote more integration internally in each country and as well sharing with one another. Now, there, of course, was a negative reaction to the Snowden revelations when all that came out, and that caused quite an uproar in Europe about so-called mass surveillance, which is a misnomer, but that's the narrative that developed. So I will say, in my time in 50 plus years in intelligence, I don't know of a time when we share more intelligence information with other countries, particularly on the subject of counterterrorism. I've never seen it like the magnitude and the extent to which we share now.
And it's reciprocated.
In some cases, yes. In other cases, not so much. It's uneven.
Oh, right here, yes. And then it'll come over back. And in the middle, too, as well. I want to make sure we get some even
Thank you.
diversity.
Mr. Director, my name is Roland Paul. I'm a lawyer. I've been in the U.S. government a couple of times in national security-related positions. Concerning the takeover part of Iraq by ISIL that's gone on for 2 years, what is your estimate of the number of people, approximate number of people have been killed, and the number of people have been displaced as a result of the ISIL success?
Well, I don't know the exact number. I mean, caused by ISIL itself, or just the general upheaval?
Since they...
Well, there's something on the order of, I think it's somewhere in the range of 500,000 people that have been displaced. I honestly don't know the exact number of people that have been killed because of this, but it's in the thousands, clearly. So it's, you know, it's bad, terrible disruption that's occurred.
Yes, right here, sir. And then come over on this side at the back.
Claude Erbsen, Innovation International. unless I'm mistaken, and there is no legal mandate for intelligence briefings to presidential candidates. That being the case, was given the circumstances of the current election process, was some thought given to not doing it? There would still be 2.5 months left for the winner of the election to get briefed in detail.
You're quite right. There's no legal requirement for that. It's a custom of our system, which was actually initiated by Harry Truman, where he became president and then realized how ignorant he was. Didn't learn about the Manhattan Project till 12 days after he'd been president. And so that custom started in 1952, and we've done that every year, every election since then. There is no requirement whatsoever for a security clearance for a candidate. The mere fact that a candidate is anointed by its party at a convention, that is all that is required. And it's not up to me or the administration to determine a candidate's suitability for these briefings. This is up to the electorate, is in the process of vetting these candidates. And it's up to the electorate. And then in 2 weeks' time, hopefully, this ordeal will be over. And then we would focus on more intense briefings, more detailed, certainly than the ones that we have given. I did get a letter from the Speaker of the House enjoining me not to brief Secretary Clinton, and lots of cards and letters from people about not briefing Mr. Trump, and that's not an option, frankly. We proceeded as we always have.
All right, at the back, yes, sir, right over there, somewhere at the back, right, yes.
General Clapper, thank you very much. A fascinating occasion as you look ahead to the next president and the most pressing issues that he or she could face in the first 6 months. How serious is the situation we're looking at in the Baltics with the Russian activities along the frontiers of the Baltic states?
I was just there not too long ago, and from their vantage, it's quite serious.
The advantage of the Baltic countries.
Well, from their vantage, they're obviously very concerned about the big bear next door. I think U.S. and in turn NATO have a number of initiatives underway to bolster their confidence. They're, I can tell you, very, very concerned about U.S. physical military presence in Europe in general, and preferably in their countries. And they don't care how small it is, just as long as there is a visible manifestation of U.S. support and interest.
What would be the Russian reaction to that?
Well, the Russians, I don't think they like it, but I do think they respect military strength.
Right here, yes.
Edward Blyer, isn't the cyber situation even more dire that as long as there's one competent hacker any place, that nation states don't matter and precautions don't matter?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I do agree that we have a serious problem in the cyber domain because, as I indicated before, of our institutional and personal dependence on the internet. And you're quite right about the damage, the potential damage that can be wrought by an individual hacker. And so that's why it's important that somehow we achieve some international norms on appropriate cyber behavior. And we're not there yet We're a long way away from that, unfortunately. But something along the lines, at least analogous to the law of the sea, which all seafaring nations generally recognize. And we need something, I think, analogous to that in the cyber realm, and we're some distance away from that.
If a nation state wants to hack, will they be able to do it?
If a nation state wants to hack, certainly.
Yeah, they can do it.
Sure.
Yes, right there. I'm trying to move it around. Yes, that's fine.
You said that both candidates had gotten briefings. Have both candidates been briefed on the cyber hacking? And do you conclude, given Mr. Trump's statements, that he didn't believe what he had heard, since he says that we don't know that the Russians are doing this? And
well, I'm not going to go into specific. We don't. The rule of thumb here is we don't discuss candidate briefings. We don't discuss what questions they asked or any of that, and we don't. And by the way, we don't share that with the White House either. It's a completely independent operation. And similarly, I won't respond directly on your question. I will say, though, that policymakers have the option of listening to intelligence or not. That's up to them.
And the role of the intelligence is to speak truth to power, as you said.
Right.
Yes, right there. We've got about 5 more minutes.
Director Clapper, what are the gravest threats emanating from Africa and the state of U.S. Intelligence activities on the continent?
Well, I think greatest threats, I would describe it as just the conditions in Africa that, and again, this is a dangerous generalization because you're talking about a lot of countries, but there's been tremendous political ferment across the continent. And what worries me about it, again, are the conditions that give rise to extremism. Ungoverned areas, places awash in weapons, countries with economic challenges, large population bulge of disaffected young males. So these conditions prevail in many places in Africa, which could, of course, already is giving rise to forms of extremism, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, AQIM, etc. So that's, as a general answer, that's my concern.
Yes, over here. Yes, right there.
Hi, I'm Lee Siegel. I do work on North Korea. Oh,
yeah, that's fine.
You talked about the assessment of threat in North Korea. I'm curious if the community's ever been asked to assess what negotiations can do to suspend North Korean nuclear programs. If not, why not? And if so, if you could share with us any of that assessment.
Well, I had my own brief foray into diplomacy with the North Koreans in November 2014, and it just proved to me I made the right decision not to try to be a diplomat.
So, why was that?
Well, in fact, it was New York Times that wrote an article about why on earth would you send a DNI on a sensitive diplomatic mission like, well, the purpose was to retrieve 2 of our citizens who were in prison under hard labor conditions. And the diagnosis by the New York Times was gruff, blunt, a relic of the Cold War, ideal for North Korea. I would say, in answer to your question, I think the notion of getting the North Koreans to denuclearize is probably a lost cause. They are not going to do that. That is their ticket to survival. And I got a good taste of that when I was there, about how the world looks from their vantage. And they are under siege and they are very paranoid. So the notion of giving up their nuclear capability, whatever it is a non-starter with them. I do think, I'm sorry?
Suspending.
Well, the best we could probably hope for is some sort of a cap. But they're not going to do that just because we ask them. There's going to have to be some significant inducements. What does bother me a bit is that we don't capitalize on our great weapon, which is information. And that's something they worry about a lot. And their reaction to the loudspeakers being activated along the DMZ, or the dropping of leaflets by NGOs over North Korea. And they go nuts when that happens. And so that is a great vulnerability that I don't think we have exploited. But right now, we're kind of stuck on our narrative and they're kind of stuck on theirs.
So an Iranian kind of negotiation that would put a cap or suspend is not, your experience in diplomacy says not likely to happen.
I don't think so.
And what about a kind of Stuxnet? Sabotage?
What
kind
about?
of sabotage of their facilities?
Well, I'm not going to go into that.
That's right. At the back.
Well,
yes, at the back. No, I'm sorry, here, you're right.
That's all right. Laetitia Guerrier-Decailleux, technology entrepreneur. 2 weeks ago, a fellow from the Academy of Science in Austria presented to us a collaboration between Austria and China on quantum cryptography. What can you share with us about our efforts in that important field, or any other efforts to protect in the long range our intelligence and the sources of this intelligence?
Well, I'll just make this a rather general answer, but I think quantum computing is a hugely important. There are those who would argue that the first one to arrive at quantum solution will have a huge advantage cryptographically over the rest of the world. That's probably all I'll say.
Do you think that the Russians believe there's a power vacuum in the world and they are rushing in to try to fill that vacuum because we may have abdicated leadership?
Well, I won't go there, but I do think there's in the natural course of history, as we've moved from a bipolar construct occasioned by the Cold War to a multipolar construct, and where countries like Russia, like China, see themselves as, and they are, important, if not dominant players in this world scene. So I don't know if that's a vacuum as much as it's just what's happened in the natural course of events, which we can't always influence.
I haven't asked you this one last question about climate. Is climate a national security issue?
It certainly is. We're seeing this already. The effects of climate on national security issues for things like availability of water or food or energy. And this increasingly, I believe, is going to play a big part in our national security landscape in the future.
Director Clapper, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Thanks a lot.